Hello, good evening from central London. Not sure if I am live or not. Relying on my admin to give me the thumbs up on this. Yes, we are. Okay, amazing. So, a little bit late today, so apologies. Again, we are going live from different platforms, including YouTube. And today we're looking at, of course, general election. Snap election has been called on Friday. I've actually been away with no access to internet. So when I got back, I was quite surprised. Together with the lease and freehold reform being pushed through. So two surprises from a rental lettings industry aspect when I got back on Monday. But today we're going to be looking at what a Labour victory would look like, and whether it will be a disaster, complete disaster for the lettings industry. So interesting to look, and we're going to be looking, of course, as always, articles and the structure of this, of course, is anyone who wants to ask any questions, feel free to jump in and ask everything that you'd like. Today's an interesting one. We're going to be also looking at a survey conducted for both landlords and agents and what that sentiment is looking like right now. So I hope you all have been enjoying a somewhat sunny day today. It seems to be kind of a hit and miss this spring. So let's look at this. We have, I'm wondering which slide to look at first. Okay, let's look at this one actually, which is property industry eye. What impact will the general election have on house prices? And then we'll kind of go into the rental impact of it. So it's interesting looking at this article. A member from Knight Frank saying that they don't expect many major impact on house prices. They will probably see more impact on the super prime area, which seems to be affecting and impacting more as to what the more wealthy side of buyers are going to be doing, and whether what kind of tax changes are going to be for them to reside here from in the UK. And of course, you're looking at people from the Middle East, Russia, not so much so something in today's world, but certainly from other parts of the world, including China and other Asian countries, and what impact that's going to have on them actually putting their pot of money here. If you're not familiar with prime London, it's not surprising and it's not unusual for very wealthy people to literally just park their money in property in prime London. Literally, you can find properties that are just vacant for years, and it's just a safe way of them perhaps being in a country that's a little bit more unstable politically, and them taking the money, putting it here. They know that the capital will always grow, especially here in London, sooner or later, and it's better than keeping it, for example, in the bank where they can, where their money is going to be exposed. It'll be great to find out what your thoughts are on that, and people just parking their money in property in prime London. So again, going back to the impact of house prices. So we got here political uncertainty ahead of the general election means Knight Frank has had to reduce their near-term forecasts for prime central London, but upwards pressure remains on rent. So again, doesn't seem to be much impact, at least for now, on the rental side. So the political uncertainty hanging over the UK property market has come into sharper focus since Rishi Sunak announced the general election. Okay, so in particular, the reform of non-dom rules had been causing a degree of hesitation in prime markets since they were proposed in March, according to Tom Beale, head of the UK residential research at Knight Frank. So again, it's interesting to see that it's the non-dom side of things that are going to be at least not given too much confidence on that side of things. And again, we're looking at super prime properties. It's interesting because we know that Labour is going to be less friendly with the non-doms and the wealthy coming into the UK, and it will be very interesting to find out how that plays out should Labour win, which the polls, at least the ones that I've been seeing so far in the last few weeks, suggest that they're leading. And we're going to be looking at a few surveys as to what landlords think about that and what's going to potentially going to sway their votes. So again, any questions, feel free to just jump on and ask the questions. We're here to answer. That's what we're here for. So the ones that I wanted to review, I can't see. Here you are. Renting done right in RNA. Is this the one? Yep. Okay. So I want to share this survey, which is very interesting. It's provided by NRLA, and it's looking at both landlords and agents, respectively. And agents, landlords, you can see here, you've got the black, you've got the green, and it asks the question: have you decided how you're going to vote in any UK-wide election? There's just a note on this. This was conducted, in my understanding, it definitely was conducted before the election being announced. My understanding time frame from today was around about 4 to 5 weeks ago. So not too long ago. They knew the election was coming up shortly, but now we're kind of in a different phase, of course, of this. So yes, I have decided. Let me blow this up a little bit. So yes, I have decided who I will vote for. 45% of landlords already knew. And this is across the country, my understanding, landlords from every different background, which of course that influences based on the demographic, psychographic, and we'll probably go into a little bit more in that, but I can geek out all day with that as to, okay, but why are these landlords responding this way? And perhaps other landlords will be responding a different way. So no, completely undecided. You've got 19% when it comes to landlords. And I think I've decided, but open to having my mind changed, 27%. So the government has 6 weeks to change their mind, right? So I have decided not to vote in the national election. Interesting. Now, what do we have here? How important are party policies in influencing your voting decision at the end, at the next general election? I'm hoping you guys can see my my screen. Let me actually pull this up here, so I can ensure that I'm giving you all the information correctly. Cool. So, influential, non-influential. Influential, 81% landlords is important to them, the policies that are going to influence their voting. Non-influential, 13%. And if we scroll down, which policy areas will determine how you vote in the next election? And this is key. It's key. I'll tell you why. It's because, again, depending on the demographic and the psychographic of these landlords, they are going to put more importance on, for example, the NHS or what's going on with pensions if they are, a little bit more older. And perhaps you've got a younger landlord, maybe in their early 20s, maybe less, putting less importance on the pension and kind of the later stages of their lives. So let's just take that into consideration. So let's go back here. General economic competence, 43%. Health and NHS, 40%. Again, as someone who's a little bit more senior, maybe put more emphasis on the NHS. Whereas someone who's younger and looking at economic competence, looking at inflation, looking at the cost of living and how it's impacting, a 30-year-old landlord with a young family, that could have a bigger impact on them. Taxation, house building policies. Talking about taxation, I'm going to digress here just ever so slightly, because taxation is going to be the big topic here, of course, and finding out what kind of taxation is going to be implemented, changed, or implemented, as I said, and how that's going to impact landlords. One major thing here, in my opinion, and what I have conversations with landlords on a daily basis, and it seems something to be missed because, of course, we talk about the renters reform, the leasehold and freehold reform. We talk about seems like I'm putting a lot of thumbs up here. We talk a lot about the the new rules that have come in, where they're abolishing Section 21, and pets being allowed, which that gets quite a few landlords blood boiling. By the way, it's very interesting to see, and we can anyone who has questions about the pets, feel free to put it through. Because there is a misconception about that, and it's always great to have that conversation with landlords and tenants, by the way. But there are all these things going on at any one time, and yet the biggest factor that I've seen that is a game changer in terms of negative point of view, and that makes the decision on whether landlords want to move out of the industry, and has done, is going to be Section 24, which is the removal of mortgage interest being allocated at expenses. Number one, but also number two, and I've got it down here, is the wear and tear of property. So that allowance that landlords once had has now been removed. Because you imagine looking at so many landlords that have exited the market, and a lot of it has been put on the media. It's because it's the renters reform bill, and they're beating down the landlords, and there is an element of truth to that. Yet, if we look at the real reason which is making this more unviable, I don't know if I made up a word there, inviable, less attractive, certainly from a financial point of view, is going to be these two factors. Imagine you having a property whereby you're getting a set income, and then suddenly, and you probably in your 60s, and then suddenly that income goes down because you can no longer offset that mortgage interest from your income. And it's a huge impact, by the way. Having to, before, being able to offset £1,000 from your £2,000 income rental, now not being able to offset £1,000. Now it's you're getting taxed on the full £2,000. That accumulates, and that makes a big impact when it comes to your pocket. So apologies, I digress there. And but going back to the taxation. When it comes to taxation, a lot of landlords are sitting tight to see what is going to be implemented, because that's going to be the difference between the Labour and Conservatives. So typically, landlords do tend to see Conservatives a little bit more landlord friendly, although it doesn't feel that way over the course of the last few months and years. However, if we take into account that renters make up, there are many more voters when it comes to renters than landlords, then it makes sense that they're trying to find the happy balance between the two. But if push comes to shove, they're going to lean a little bit more on the tenant side. I think it's something in the region of 8 million tenants. Actually, let me look that up. Yeah. So when you look at renters, I'm going to attempt to share this with you guys. There you are. So, number of renters in the UK, 8.6 million households renting in the UK. Those are a lot of voters. But you can't, of course, ignore the amount of voters that are in landlords, which is almost in the region of 3 million. So you can't just turn your back completely on that demographic of voters. So we've looked at the impact of the general election. I do want to go back on, let me have a look here. Let's look at Labour whilst we're on the topic of Labour. This is an interesting one. Labour spooking landlord with his attitude to renting new figures. Just over 40% of landlords say they are undecided on who to vote for on July the 4th. It's a bigger proportion are worried about what a Labour government will mean. When asked how they were going to vote, 40% they don't know, which is pretty much what we saw with the NRLA survey. Slightly more than 5% Of the undecided, the largest portion of those landlords with portfolios of 4 to 10 properties, while landlords with 20 or more properties make up a quarter. The majority of those landlords undecided operate within a limited company. And of course, this goes for business owners as well. A lot of business owners are, someone who operates more than 20 properties under a limited company, they are business owners operating a business. And these are the demographic that are sitting tight to wait and see what those policies that the government and the manifesto is going to do to impact their particular business and their livelihood. So if we look at here, but the survey by the landlord, but Land Bay also found that nearly half of the landlords, 48%, have concerns about potential change of government. When explaining the reason, respondent described Labour as anti-landlord and the potential government offering too many unknowns, with many of the policies of the two main parties seeming closely aligned. Others said that their vote will go to the party that will reduce the heavy tax burden facing landlords. I'll tell you now that the biggest change that the government could do is going to be around this Section 24. And I don't see it happening yet. If it did happen, I tell you that a lot of landlords would be swayed. We've talked about the incentive, the most recent incentive that the government has implemented for capital gain tax, which isn't huge. But again, I've talked about the smokes and mirrors, whereby the landlords who own the property a certain amount of time. I'm not going to go into the real nitty and gritty detail of it, but my understanding was there was much more incentives there, and now they kind of put in this very slight incentive, which doesn't really make sense in comparison what was there before. So it's not quite having the impact that perhaps the government wanted. So yeah, that's interesting. So let's look at this. Why political change will be no panacea for the landlords. So new rules for landlords have been watered down and delayed, but Labour will likely pick up the baton. And I think that is the biggest concerns that landlords have, that these new rules have been pushed, and will there be room for landlords then to make their own tweaks? One of the biggest concerns I have seen is this one here. Holiday lets come with even more political risk. I think this is one of the biggest things that we've seen, because we have, and I know that this is somewhere actually. I'll jump on and look at for another article, but whilst we're here, I don't want to jump in and out. But there is an article in whereby Labour very specifically says that they will come in to see how they are going to stop landlords sort of flooding into the short-term let industry and having an impact on the longer let side of the rental industry. How they are going to do that would be very interesting. But if you've listened to my live or my videos before, you'll know that this is a very attractive sector. It's not for everyone. I mean, typically landlords will make in the region of around about 30% more on short lets than what they would make on the long let. And it's just a very attractive model. Also, knowing that they can have their property available in certain weeks or certain months of the year is also something that is attractive to them. And of course, I'm talking about smaller landlords. There is no reason why the big portfolio landlords, at least, will want their property to be available certain weeks or months of the year. So considering foreign investment might be the new way to protect buy-to-let profits. So it's doubtful if many landlords will bemoan Michael Gove's decision to join the exodus of Conservative MPs. Okay, so one of the principal reasons why many buy-to-let landlords have parked their capital elsewhere is they are no longer able to claim mortgage interest. Going back to my point of Section 24, payments against the rental income. Proposed changes, tenancy agreements have also hurt this corner of the market. no matter how well-intentioned they may have been, the withdrawal supply during a period where interest rates cranked up has had a predictable effect on the rental changes, up by record margin through 2023. It wouldn't be the first time that interventionist policies have achieved the exact opposite of what they were intended to deliver. But it's doubtful whether a looming Labour administration will take a more laissez-faire approach. So, going back to the, let me come back to this. Oh, my Mac was going to run out. So, going back to policies that go wrong and have an opposite effect reminds me of the tenancy fee ban of 2019. Total different, totally impact. Let's remember, guys, landlords, that when you take away landlords' income in any way, or agency income for that fact, it has a cause and an effect. If you take away an income from the agent for whatever reason, agent, you can't charge a fee to the tenants. That's already been incorporated within the profits. So if they can't take that income, they're going to pass that fee onto the landlord. And what's the landlord going to do? Increase the rent, because the landlord also has bills to pay. So I thought, I'll go a little bit. I digress a little bit. Let's look at some questions we have here. So, incredibly helpful. Well, thank you very much, Anna. I'm glad it's proven to be helpful for you. Well, it's great to hear different perspectives on how the election impact the rental market. Okay, let's have a look here. How might Labour election victory impact rental income? Apologies. Okay, so that's a good question. So a Labour election, as I said before, has can have a negative impact in whereby they are seen to be more tenant friendly, and what track record tells us is that they are going to be more tax heavy when it comes to landlords. You are currently sharing this machine. Okay, give me 1 sec. Apologies, a bit of a technical issue there. So they have said, of course, that they will bring in some type of rent control. They've now put it a little bit lighter, saying actually it won't be rent control, it will be more of a rent stabilizer measures. What that means is, I guess, it's a less strict. From my understanding, is rent control is very strict. It says you may not increase the rent full stop by X amount every year. Rent stabilizer is you may increase the rent, but it needs to be in line with inflation, for example. It needs to be in line with what people's income is in that particular neighborhood. So there will be all these little conditions as to how you may or may not increase the rent. So again, changing the wording, which politicians are incredibly good at, changing the wording and repackaging things. So from that perspective, I hope I'm answering your question as to how a Labour victory will impact at least the landlords. So this could potentially reduce landlords' ability, of course, to raise rents, and that's going to hurt your pocket if you're a landlord yourself who you're asking the question. So let's go on to look at what other slides. Let's go back actually to this very helpful survey we have here. So we looked at policies, how it's going to determine, which is great. Seniority levels of letting agents, that said housing policy will determine how they vote. So this is interesting. I mean, this is an agent's perspective, of course. And again, it will be very similar to a landlord as well, as to the seniority and how and what would actually sway their votes. So junior, 14%, negotiator 17%, director, managing director 25%, and senior department head 19%. So as you can see, as you get closer to senior management and director managers, you're almost in the double digits, whereby it will determine how they vote um, in terms of the housing policy. I guess it's because directors, of course, managers, and so forth, have more of a stake in the housing policy as opposed to juniors and junior negotiators. So we've got landlords here. So landlords, how important are party policies towards the private renting sector in influencing your own voting decision at the next general election? Extremely influential. You've got portfolio landlords and all landlords. So this is great that we can, see the different backgrounds and demographics. So we've got on the grey area, single property landlords, 23% will be very important. Important policies towards the private rental sector. So 23% from a single property landlord, portfolio landlords, 30%, and then 29%. Again, no surprise there that as you get to more portfolio, more of a business point of view, then it's going to have a bigger impact as to how they vote. Very influential, 20%, and then somewhat influential from a portfolio landlord point of view. You've got 19%, sorry, 20%, and then the more green is the all landlords. So what policies will sway the undecided? Okay, NHS, taxation. This is where, guys, we get into demographics and psychographics. So again, depending on where you are at any point of your lifespan is going to determine really whether it's NHS, with the cost of living and so forth. I mean, a pensioner, of course, that or landlord, let's say, that has a couple of properties, of course, their rents are increasing together with inflation. The cost of living is going to have somewhat impact on them, but I don't think it's going to be an impact that's going to have, a substantial impact. Whereas if you have a junior negotiator or someone in the early 20s who's making ends meet, doesn't have a couple of properties to rely on or a state pension, just have their minimum wage, then that's going to have a bigger impact on them. NHS, again, we talked about, being more senior, it's going to be more important to you. So I do want to jump on a few more articles that we have here. But again, guys, if you have any questions, let me know. I can see here there's another question come up. Do you think the housing market regulations be stricter under Labour? So, yeah, I mean, we just covered part of this. Yes, I do believe that from a rental perspective, at least, I do believe that it will be somewhat stricter under Labour. It will be somewhat stricter under Labour. So the answer is yes, for sure. But again, let's not forget that the Renters' Reform Bill has been passed already. So I wouldn't expect huge changes there, Martha. And I think that was the actual intention with Conservatives pushing this through very quickly. Okay, so let's look at this, actually. This is an interesting one. The next government must treat renters' rights as a priority. So this is an article came out, I think this was today. What's the date today? The 28th? 29th? Yeah. So yesterday, in the 2019 election manifesto, the Conservatives promised to ban Section 21 evictions. Of course, that's gone through already. It's law, it's not been implemented, and it will be implemented depending on the type of tenancy, at what stage the tenancy is going to be at. I won't bore you. If you want to look at the renters reform, have a look at one of my videos in the last couple of weeks, whereby I explain a little bit more as to how that's going to be rolled out. So, but passing a bill to implement that pledge has proved problematic, with several of the government's own backbenchers demanding greater protections for landlords. Now, I've had a lot of stick about this actually as to why MPs want so many protection for landlords, and a lot of argument about actually a lot of MPs are actually landlords themselves and they shouldn't have a say on this. Would be good to find out your opinion on this. If an MP is a landlord and they're making policies on the rent industry, should they have a say? Good question and good point. So, despite hoping for changes, Labour sources had indicated the party would have let the bill go through as part of the wash-up period on Friday. But the government source suggested amendments from crossbench or independent peers in the House of Lords meant that was not enough time to pass the legislation. It has been widely suggested that Labour could reintroduce the bill if it wins the election. I'm not an expert, politically at least, but from what I hear, that just simply won't happen. Labour reintroducing the bill won't happen. Again, if you think otherwise, that's the whole point of me, doing these live videos. I'll give you the data. I'll give you my interpretation based on my expertise, based on the conversations I have on a daily basis of both landlords, tenants, investors. And if you think I'm completely wrong, feel free to leave me a comment. So, a ban on no-fault evictions with cost living crisis, high interest rates. Many renters are struggling to pay the rent. So, this is just really kind of a breakdown justifying why we need more rights for renters. And I totally get it. I do get it. So we have another question here from Anna. How could property taxation be affected by the election? Well, I guess it goes back to the taxation that we discussed before, right? Which was for example, Labour had suggested reforms to the council tax, possibly replacing it with a more progressive tax system. There's a note I had here when it comes to taxation, increasing the tax burden on higher value properties, for example, from that perspective, and potentially affecting landlords with multiple or higher value properties. I don't think they're going to do much with the capital gain tax, but it's also interesting, if you put enough obstacles for people to invest in property, especially when it comes to overseas. And I think that's the biggest tax changes that we've seen with overseas buyers. And this makes up a good portion of landlords here in the UK, especially in London. So if you put enough pain there, then it will divert investors, especially overseas investors, elsewhere. And therefore, of course, to answer your question, that will have an impact on taxes, but also overall, perhaps even the supply of properties, that will have a knock-on effect then on the housing crisis that we're currently living. Until, of course, Labour or Conservative come up with a solution, which actually I want to come into. There is another housing crisis reform efforts. No, remote support. Sorry, guys. I just want to. Let's go into this one. This was a good article. Here you are. So, General Election Hub, keeping you up to date. Manifestos. Well, Prime Minister really, okay, we talked about this ever so slightly. More information. Okay, this is not going to be the best one. This is more talking about manifestos and what we should expect. Obviously, we don't know because neither the Conservatives nor Labour have come across with anything. But Labour has already made 6 key election pledges to deliver economic stability, cut NHS waiting times. So, yeah, they've made quite a few pledges, but nothing on the housing, which we're still waiting. Housing is notable by its absence from this list. Yeah. No surprise there, although the party has, like the Conservatives, previously pledged to abolish the Section 21. Okay. I am mindful of the time. I don't want to keep you guys from your dinner, and especially my team who's supporting me with this live stream. So there is one here. Let me see which one. Let's go with this one. Labour reviews calls for National Landlord Register rent and stabilisation. I guess this is what one of the uh, questions that I answered earlier. So the report commissioned by Labour has called for major overhaul of private rental sector. So there is also calls for Section 2104 to be abolished, Britain's broken housing sector, holistic approach to fixing the housing market. So this is an interesting one. Holistic approach to fix the housing market. The report outlines 5 key areas for reform, emphasizing the need for a holistic approach. So firstly, you've got increased supply of social housing, genuinely affordable for homes. This is really one of the topics that it just amazes me that is ignored and that just seems to be just going under the table, which is providing more social housing. And it just seems to be just really literally just put to one side and focused on other topics. It is a holistic approach. It isn't one let's tackle the landlords. Those are the scapegoats. It's the landlord's fault. Um, and this brings me actually to a comment I had in one of our videos a few weeks back, which was, greedy landlords. And I'm like, really? I'm not here to defend landlords, by the way. I think if you look at the full picture, you will naturally find that it's not just one stakeholder here. Is it really greedy landlords, or is it greedy taxman? And is it greedy lenders, banks? And is it greedy council? There are sort of so many stakeholders here. Is it greedy developers, right? Because we can see that new builds are making up a huge part of the rental market since a few years ago, and it's going to continue to be going through. Is it going to be greedy freeholders who hold all of these leases and have service charges through the roof? If service charges are doubling every so often and they are putting kind of these crazy charges of maintenance, that's passed on to the landlord. Who does the landlord pass that on to? Passes it on to the renters. So it is a holistic approach. Sorry, went on a little bit of a rant there, but I thought it was important to share. So, holistic approach, increase supply of social housing. So the review highlights the importance of increasing social housing stock and boosting the supply. Let's hold the government accountable to that, because that's the part that the government's not doing, and then having to fall back to the landlords, telling them what they can and can't do with their property, where the landlord bought that property with their own money. Should there be some rules and regulations? Absolutely. But, I think we're going borderlines. I was going to say something, you may not agree with this, but, communist on this, literally, this is completely anti-capitalist. And we're right on the borderline, in my opinion. Can you be a capitalist and have a heart? 100%. I believe you can. National Landlord Register to enforce standards. Totally agree with this. I think there should be a register, and standards should be raised both for landlords and agents. They shouldn't be able to, and it's a very small, it's the minority, because most do, but we need to flush out this minority, or get up to date and keep with the standards. Stop giving the industry a bad name, because most landlords and agents are actually very professional. And Section 21, no fault evictions to provide security for tenants. I will stand by this, as long as Section 8, which it gives landlords a right in particular situations to evict the tenant, then why not? But they need to make that robust, and most importantly, the courts need to be up to date to be able to manage and be fair on landlords should they need to action the Section 8. Rent, and by the way, if you want to find out more about Section 8, again, just hop on to, if you're not subscribed to our channel, hop on to the videos, which will explain everything for you in more detail. Rent stabilizations, not rent controls. I'm not sure about this one. I truly am not. Now, I was nothing but a very young child when the whole poll tax came into place with the Conservatives. And but one thing I do remember and stayed with me, and I may butcher this completely. And if you're old enough to have lived through those years, please feel free to leave a comment. The the gist of it is, we had this poll tax kind of thing to be implemented and introduced, and everyone went up in arms, literally, and then the government, from my understanding, had to pull back a little bit on it and say, okay, we've listened, we won't do it. But then they kind of repackaged something and put it through. We're getting rid of the poll tax. But here you are, we've got this new shiny thing called council tax, and rebranded it and repackaged it. And it seems, people kind of went, okay, fair enough. Again, if I may have totally butchered it, but I know there's an element of truth in there, and it's very common with politics where they propose one thing and it doesn't quite work. But it's not very popular, and they go away and kind of say, "Guys, let's repackage this and rebrand it." So this is a very interesting article. Stabilization again with the rent. No, not keen on it. I believe that the market regulates itself as long as the government, of course, doesn't butt in. I think a lot of the rent increases that have happened over the course of the last few years have been product of the government. That's my opinion. So discourage landlords from moving to other sectors, and this is the key point that that Labour, of course, is looking to do. The report suggests measures to discourage the private rented sector landlords from moving to the short-term holiday let for temporary accommodation sectors, aiming to preserve long-term rentals. Tell me, guys, what you guys think about this. Landlords should pay to use the National Landlord Register. Of course, again, all of these implementations are going to increase landlords' costs to register for this national register. They have to pay to also be part of the Bodman, some type of compliance that's going to regulate them. Again, they're going to have to pay. Also, I heard something or saw an article the other day whereby their admin is going to also increase. Why? With this new renters reform bill, it now looks like that you cannot have a fixed tenancy when it's implemented, right? Which they haven't done yet. But when they do, if there's more turnover, so if a tenant can just come in, rent for 8 months, what happens to the landlord if you're not aware? The landlord, of course, has taken the burden of the cost of the check-in and check-out, plus other administrations as well that cost to add to that. That alone is like £300. It's like £150 check-in, £150 check-out for the inventory clerk to do all of that. Plus, you have other, again, administrative costs that you need to do as well. Now, suddenly, instead of doing that every couple of years, potentially landlord's going to have to do that every 6 months, because the tenant can move out. Depending on what region you are in the UK, of course, that may not happen, because we do tend to see tenants staying longer than usual. But just something to look at. I was also looking at sort of different tactics that landlord may resort to kind of counterbalance these costs, whereby they may be looking to say, okay, so I know you can leave in 6 months. Then what I'm going to do is, as an example, the rent for the first 6 months is going to be £2,000 per month for the first 6 months. But then the rent after the 6 months will be 1,900 per month. And this is almost saying to you, you're going to pay the absolute maximum, even probably, if I can get it, even beyond market value for the first 6 months. So that if you do end up staying for 6 months, you're not going to be the equivalent of actually a short let, but it's going to be a certain amount that's going to cover my costs. Sorry, Digress there again quite a bit passionate, as you can hear in my voice. Okay. Rent rises being restricted under Labour. Annual increases only. 4 months notice increase. No rent review clauses. Rent increase is limited to local wage growth, which we discussed just before. There should be one system for England and Wales. Interesting stuff. I'm hoping that all of this stuff is being helpful for you guys. And I think we've gone through most, if not all, of the slides. Rental reform bill. Essential guide. This is not going to be the one. Next generation monitoring renters reform bill. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. So the very last bit I probably wanted to share with you was about the survey, which if I could find it, here you are. Okay, yeah. So housing policy sway letting options. And this just goes really, really geeky in terms of Conservative Party. So, to what extent do you agree that this party supports a sustainable and healthy private rented sector? I'll repeat that. To what extent do you agree that this party supports a sustainable and healthy private rented sector? So you've got Reds putting strongly disagree, right down to don't know, and everything in between. So Conservative Party, 20% strongly disagree that it supports a sustainable, healthy sector. And then that goes to sort of 33% here into don't know and strongly agree. Labour Party 25% and Liberal Democrat 14%. I haven't heard much about the Liberal Democrat this year round, so that will be something to keep an eye on. Letting agents. This is more towards letting agents. Given the announced changes in capital gain tax, how likely is it that you will now sell property from your portfolio? I love this stats, actually. This is very informative. So extremely unlikely, 23%. So we can see that the so-called incentive to get people to sell property isn't huge, especially when it comes to landlords. Now, one thing we've got to remember, guys, is that a lot of landlords, especially these old school landlords, have remortgaged quite a fair amount. So it may well be that they don't even have much equity there to begin with right now. So it may not be any incentive. And again, as I said before, there were more incentives before, depending on when you bought the property and other aspects to capital gain tax, and that was removed. And now this has been now be given. So they actually feel like okay, you gave me 10 suites a few years ago. Now you're giving me 3 suites, and you think that's an incentive. Well, I don't think so. Extremely unlikely, 23%. Somewhat unlikely, 11%. Neither likely nor unlikely. So, don't think this had much of an impact at all. So listen, guys, it is now coming to 7:30. I promise I will not keep you from your dinner. What support? There is one question here that I don't want to be rude. What support, if any, might landlords free from Labour government? I think the support is going to be more towards renters, in my opinion. But I guess, yeah, whilst their primary focus is going to be tenants, there may be more support for landlords in terms of incentives of property improvements, I guess, especially to enhance energy efficiency, which, by the way, we didn't touch upon. So one of the things to look out for from Labour is definitely going to be the EPC, which has been scrapped currently, which I think is more put on hold currently by the Conservative Party. But that's going to be a huge one to look out for, which I had here on my note, actually, in terms of kind of policies. Section 24, which is the mortgage interest, wear and tear. but also had the kind of energy efficiency, because that's going to be a huge cost for landlords to try and get that up to date. And landlords have a little bit of a breathing space at the moment. I think I have no doubt that if Labour comes into play, this is something that's going to be at the top of the agenda. But also, even Conservative, at some point, I believe this is going to be brought back. So I think landlords will be sensible, those who want to stay in the market, slowly but surely, ensure that um, start getting this up to date. Don't be in no rush. There's no need to. But at some point, I think it will be sensible, so you don't just it doesn't suddenly just land on your desk and you have to take out money to make arrangements. Anyway, guys, thank you so much. As always, really appreciate the time. Any comments, put it on the comment section. Have a good evening. Stay safe.